Hey, what's up, guys? You're listening to the Zack Scriven podcast, and in this episode, we're talking to Vladimir Romanov, and it's a really interesting conversation. He's a system integrator. He also does his own YouTube content and does his own PLC training videos. So, really had something to connect with him on, and we talked about automation, system integration, as well as we actually dove really deeply into the technical analysis of how you would structure a PLC program. But I just wanted to, before we jump into the show, I want to say thank you to 4.0 Solutions for sponsoring Automation Month 2019 on the Zack Scriven podcast. Today's best-in-class product is best-in-class information management platform. That's Flow software. As you guys, for those of you that follow me, know that Flow has been a long-time supporter of Zack Scriven Media, the vlog, and the channel. So thank you, Flow, for not only supporting the channel, but for making a product that is best in class information management. Check it out at flow-software.com. Thank you again, 4.0 Solutions. Now let's get into the podcast. Yeah, man, how you doing? Thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Super excited to be on your podcast, and I saw a couple of your videos, so it's a very interesting endeavor, I guess, and combined with your controls background, I think it makes a very interesting just topic, I guess.
Oh yeah, definitely. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to do it, was I felt that this industry is underrepresented in new media. So man, why don't we talk a little bit about your backstory in this industry, how it connects with the theme of Automation Month?
Sure. Let me give you a quick spiel, I guess, that I usually give in interviews and so on. So I graduated with my double E in 2013 from Montreal-based University, Concordia, and quickly moved to the US, joined Procter & Gamble as an automation engineer. And at that time, I was pretty much brand new. I didn't even know what a PLC was. And, was fortunate enough to join a company which was able to kind of mentor me, bring me on board. I went to several, Rockwell classes. And from that point on, I guess I fell in love with automation, but it was something that I guess was kind of unknown to me. And so I kind of grew within that role. Then I ended up switching companies, went to work for Kraft Heinz as engineer / maintenance supervisor, and did a lot even more hands-on work at that facility, and once again had just really good kind of opportunities. So managed to become a systems integrator at this really small firm called Dream Version, and now I essentially support different sites. And it's just super awesome to be in automation. I think there's going to be a lot of growth, not only, I guess, for multiple reasons, political and otherwise, but just technology keeps advancing, and there's a lot of potential, I think, in automating not only like pure labor, but just in terms of like machine vision. There's a lot of stuff that's coming out, I think, that's going to help it.
Awesome, man.
Yep.
I see it says you're in Los Angeles area. Is that true on your LinkedIn profile?
That's actually old information, but I guess as of January of this year, I ended up relocating back to where I was originally from, or where I grew up, which is Montreal, Canada. But like I told you, I've been all over the place. My first job was actually in Maine, so it's it's been an interesting parkour, so to speak. But I guess I still have some ties to Los Angeles because I do help a couple of sites out there, so I am there.
Awesome.
Here and there.
Yeah, I was gonna give you a hard time then if you were and you didn't come by the actual studios here to do the podcast in person.
I would have, and maybe down the road, if there's an opportunity, that'd be pretty cool.
Dope, man. So I see you have like was it a Compact Logix, a Siemens S7 1200 panel view? Go over the setup that you got right there and explain it for the people that are just listening.
Sure. So this is kind of a kit that I use for personal testing and programming, and I guess to give you even more information, I do also some YouTube videos on PLC and automation. It's a small channel at the moment, but to give you an idea, it's just me giving examples of different instructions on PLC programming and kind of going through, breaking down what people would need in the industry as well. What about you? I guess I wanted to ask you, more on background and how you switched from controls to what you do now, which seems to be, like you said, bringing the social media as well as.
Yeah, definitely. I lost you for a little bit there, but I'll edit that part out. But uh, just yeah. So I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like a similar story to you. Like you said, you're making the YouTube videos, doing PLC programming. That's not exactly, I
Mhm.
guess, what I do, but I did from the sense that feel that the industry needed more training, needed more resources, needed more content and coverage, and I saw that as a white space within the industry. So that is really cool that you're doing that, and yeah, and I just wanted to do something different, wanted to do something unique, and something that was more in alignment with my passion and my values and things like that. So
But how did you get started in that? Did you, I guess, because I'm assuming from your timeline, you were still working as a controls engineer and you were doing this on the side, and then, once it picked up, then you kind of switched, or, and I
yeah.
guess kind of maybe some advice that you would give, because I'm somewhat in a similar situation, I guess, in a different niche, but still trying to maybe come up and do something on my own rather than, keep doing this integrations work. So,
Well, I'll say that you at least seem to be more focused than I was at the time. So,
okay.
I kind of had been posting videos all the way going back to when I was in high school. I did like when YouTube first came out, I did like a couple of Rubik's Cube videos,
Mhm.
Guitar Hero videos. Some of them were parodies,
Okay.
and I just always liked doing that. Expressing my personality on camera and engaging with an online community was really cool. So fast forward, my parents, they had the system integration firm. That's how I got involved in the industry. Started
Okay.
working for their business, and eventually when I graduated high school, I started working for them full time, and I was like making a little bit of training videos on the side, just throwing them up on YouTube. Nothing really consistent or thought out. It was just kind of like, oh, I had a random idea, I'd post a video. Um, so that really kind of switched kind of within the last few years. I closed down that company, my parents' company that I took over, and I went to go work for Vertec, another systems integration firm. Worked for them for about a couple years, and occasionally would do like videos, or occasionally would do like a LinkedIn article. So I was like kind of
Okay.
actively building like the network and in our space. So that was a definite help.
Hmm.
And I moved to another position at another firm. I was only there about 8 months before I actually then quit to do this full time. But during that time, I was actually doing a lot of different things on the online video. Like I was actually involved in an Airbnb community, doing live video there, kind of almost acting like a niche influencer within that community. And I would like work with products and sponsors like to get free product or discounts on services. So that was like just kind of a really cool concept. Bitcoin was really popular at the time too, and I started doing like videos about Bitcoin and getting people to refer to Coinbase. So like just
Hmm.
small little wins and just like kind of changed my mind, changed
Okay.
because it's like a natural thing. It's like an unnatural thing to kind of dive into, right? Because we weren't grown up that way. I
Hmm.
think the next generation will be like more connected with technology more easily. So we're
Okay.
kind of at that cusp where you really need to reprogram your mind in order to be able to even conceive of doing something like this. But I see you're well on your way, man. I'm excited for you. That's cool.
Yeah. Thanks. Definitely. That if you don't mind me asking, I guess to follow up on your description, which is, I guess you had some luck in that area too. But a question that I often get, I guess, from colleagues or technicians or anybody that's in automation in general is it possible to kind of get into a control systems engineering role without like a degree? And like, what have you seen? Of course, with your background, it seems like I guess you didn't have a formal training on controls engineering, right? As far as I understand, but you were able to kind of still get into that role and perform the job, and were
Yeah.
pretty successful at that. So,
Yeah,
what are
that's
your thoughts
that's
on?
yeah, so it's obviously not 100% necessary, with us, me being the exception and many others. But it's kind of confusing though, right? Because I have a unique situation where my parents own that business, so I was working for them like when I was 11 years old and stuff. and customer facing, like when I was 16 and 16 and over. Like I developed and delivered my first system when I was like 18, including PLC programming, radio
Wow.
configurations, virtual servers, Wonderware,
Hmm.
Historian, all that. Like, so I pretty much got the full scope of what a SCADA system for a water wastewater, or what it was, a water production system with a water treatment plant. So that was like a
Gotcha.
really good experience. And so I think from that perspective, it's not as much necessary. I think when you start getting into more like niches within it, like I don't know, like some of the more mechanical engineering things or like fluid dynamics, you probably want a degree in that scenario. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
I'm open to anything, you know. I'm more open about like as long as you can deliver results, then you should be able to do the job. You know,
Yeah.
that kind of becomes a blurry line when you get into like public safety and things like that. But then again, I am controlling the water system for like, an entire population. So it's kind of, it's weird, it's like a
Yeah.
gray area.
No, it's just an interesting perspective, because I think we do see those questions kind of asked quite frequently on social media. Bless you. And yeah,
Sorry,
so
I was drinking coffee. It went down the wrong pipe.
all good, all good. So what are your, I guess, plans in terms of social media growth like for the future? Do you have some kind of a idea of where you want to take this? Or you?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that, man. So the podcast is definitely one of my main content pillars.
Mhm.
It's really like a passion project. It's kind of where I can be more expressive and then and tell a story, like a long lasting story from like when I actually started, before I even quit my job last year. The podcast started a year ago. I was actually interviewing a cryptocurrency miner. And then I did a couple Airbnb podcasts, and then eventually it's kind of grown into where I'm at now. So the podcast was something that I knew I could stick with because of its residual value in just documenting my whatever it is I'm going through at that time, whatever it is I'm working towards. So the podcast is definitely a big pillar of that. Zack Scriven Media is my content creation agency, marketing
Yeah.
agency. And I do work with a couple clients to create videos for their channels, and I'm primarily focused on LinkedIn. And yeah, so then I do that. And then I also take brand deals, sponsorships, and do a little bit of influencer marketing, event marketing. And like, so I just actually got off the phone with Jose Riviera,
Okay.
for the CSIA, and he hooked it up with a media pass to the CSIA conference. So I'm going to that. I'm going to Exchange 2019, which is Wonderware South Africa distributor, but they're now called IS Cubed, Industrial Software Solutions and Support. So they're throwing on this like conference in South Africa, and I'm going to that for free. They're also covering my accommodation at this beautiful resort in South Africa. South Africa. So that's like another
That's
thing that, yeah, I'm just like having fun and sharing these stories and just creating something different, but then making it like manifest into reality. So I actually do want to go to all 7 continents. So that's kind of like a sub tangential story to just me going to this Wonderware South Africa
yeah.
conference.
No, I think that's really awesome. Like I guess we said that at the beginning, but it's really cool to be able to combine some of your like technical passions and also, I guess, bring some light to, I guess, not only to industrial automation, but some of the other technologies that you've been familiar with. But a lot of times, I think engineers in general nowadays are not as well represented as we would like it to be, for one reason or another. And I think that STEM fields just in general lack engineers in general. So it's really cool that you're able to combine your social expertise and be able to travel and go to these super cool conferences, which, personally, I'd love to go to all these places, but sometimes you just don't have the opportunity or just don't have the time slash funds to be able to enjoy those things. So it's
Right.
really
Yeah,
cool
because
to,
I mean, as a system integrator, you're delivering projects. That's how you get paid. So I just was like, all right, well, if I want to go to these events, let me figure out a way I can get paid to go to do the things that I love to do, and
yeah.
just kind of like crafted a reality. Yeah, I mean, but definitely it's been hard to stick with, right? But I think because the more I've stuck with industrial automation as kind of like my content focus,
Hmm.
and the clients that I work with, those are also in that niche. So we kind of create like this network marketing effect. So I can distribute content through their channels, like Flow Software, like Intellect. Sure you've seen their videos. So we're kind of like creating this ecosystem of content marketing.
Sweet. And do you ever get
Network marketing, yeah. Oh, sorry about that. What's that one?
no, I was going to ask, like, do you ever get pulled in back on the technical side? Because I guess what I'm seeing with myself is that the moment I want to focus more on, like the content and maybe social media, then I get like more assignments on the technical side. And of course, as you probably know, it's a field that's paid pretty well. So it's very difficult to kind of detach yourself from the technical. And I guess my question is, as you work with these integrators, like, do they ever like want you for your like technical expertise? And it's always tempting to kind of go back to that.
Yeah, it's definitely tempting. Like I mean, industrial, engineering, automation engineering, it's a really high paying job. And then, so to leave that and then go into marketing, which I was just starting a company at, like my income went in half. So it was definitely tempting to do more consulting on the side. In fact, I did do that a number of times, and I still do. And even working for Intellect, I did some engineering for them. But for them, I think it really makes sense for my marketing to be my focus,
Mm-hmm.
and content development and personal branding for like Walker. Essentially, that's what we're building. Is we're building a personal brand around Walker. Like, and then when we do a podcast together, it's kind of like if you watch like the Joe Rogan podcast, you see like Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro and all these kind of
Right.
sphere of commentators and really thought leaders. That's kind of what we're trying to develop, and so that's kind of why I do that. But yeah, so it's actually gotten more successful, but really the turning point was Upwork. So I started marketing myself on Upwork because that kind of allows me the flexibility to create a schedule that, like right now, I'm doing 4 podcasts in a row, 4 1-hour podcasts back to back to back to back.
Right.
I can just shift my work window around that. And I'm actually working with a company that's actually really cool about being flexible with me on my hours. Marcus, he hired me through Upwork, and they work for servicing the oil and gas industry with ozone treatment systems. So it's kind of like an OEM, and it's Ignition Edge, and it's an MQTT IoT infrastructure, and we're developing a front end web app in like React. So
Okay.
it's really slick. Yeah, and Ignition's kind of like the back end and Edge on the front end, like for developing these systems out in the field and treating like frack water or stuff like that for oil and gas industry, but also for other industries too. But so that's like really cool. That wouldn't have been possible if I was at a 9 to 5 standard, brick and mortar integration position. Because
Right.
then I'd be at work, and then I wouldn't, it's like then they're trying to accommodate for you, and I found that really to be the struggle, working for that kind of. It's a toss up,
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely understand each other, and I think it's also like rarely a 9 to 5. It's more of a 6 to 6, if not, further. I mean, at least that's my experience. I don't know. It depends on where you're at in the world, but I
Yeah.
guess manufacturing just never stops. It's 24/7, so you got to be able to be very flexible. But hey, actually, really curious about that mention of Upwork because. I guess even for personal kind of interest, and I'm sure the viewers would enjoy that too. But I guess I haven't really had that much success, and I did try to create a profile and find maybe some remote work or kind of a part-time based work, like you said. And maybe can you give us or can you give me some tips on that aspect and like how to find because
Okay.
I guess my experience as an integrator is that the customers always want you to be very kind of at the site. They want to see you, they want to be able to see what you're doing. So I guess I was really curious how that all worked out for you.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it is becoming more popular. So I'm sure more people are interested in doing that, or if they haven't created the profile already, like yourself. The biggest opportunities that I get on Upwork are all inbound. So it's people that find my YouTube channel and they see that I'm on Upwork and or like on LinkedIn, I have myself listed as working for Upwork as a freelance industrial programmer. So
Hmm.
I'm driving that traffic to Upwork, and
That's
like
smart.
there's a couple companies that they'll invite you to bid on a job. So I'm not like going out and bidding on a bunch of jobs. I'm actually trying to create a new market. I'm trying to, refer customers that I'm already working with. Hey, take a look at Upwork. It might be something that you guys might not even just use for me, but for use for your digital marketing or use for, fill in the blank, right? Fiverr is another really popular program that I use as Zack Scriven Media to create digital assets like um, animated logo intros or like a YouTube end card. I'm going to create one. I did all my new branding for Zack Scriven podcast and Zack Scriven Media through Upwork, and I just hired a freelancer, and like she was really good. She turned it around quickly, and
Hmm.
like I was like, all right, well, it would have taken me days to get, like, it would never have even looked this good, right? So I'm getting better about outsourcing, and but yeah, so I mean, answering your original question, Upwork really was the key in finding that balance between doing the marketing and doing and staying connected and actually doing some of the work within the industry.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I especially like that project is Ignition. So now I can actually talk about these subjects with more authority that I'm still actually doing it, right?
Yeah, and was it? I guess I'm just trying to figure out the logistics of working through Upwork. Like, did you have to like meet with the client and discuss kind of the project, or was it more remote? And like even now that you're working on this project, do you have to go to the site? Like, how does that like
Okay. Yeah, great question.
work out?
So Upwork, the intention, the precedent is that it is all remote.
Okay.
So there was actually one client that everything, I mean, he was actually really good. He sent me an email with a text document that had the VPN login credentials. He had my user account already set up. He pretty much had screenshots of how I was going to get in. Boom, within like 10 minutes I'm in, and I'm on, like, he gave me the location and the C directory of where the PLC program was, and all I was to do was to just add like 10 flow transmitters into a live running redundant control logics PLC.
Okay.
And I, added the tags online, named them according to like their existing structure, went into their Ignition HMI application, added those sensors into, there using the UDT structure and everything.
Hmm.
And within 3 hours, like I was offline, like I did all of that, like across the country at 10 o'clock at night, like without ever really seeing the guy. We had one 15-minute phone conversation before he awarded the contract, but yeah, he actually wanted to do more work, but I had to unfortunately turn it down because I'm really kind of focusing on one client right now on Upwork. If I was doing too many, I would just get distracted and I would like drop the ball. So I have to learn when to say no, because at the same time, if I just did all Upwork and no digital marketing, then well, those businesses would die. I would kind of leave my audience hanging, and I don't want to do that. And so it is that perfect balance, but it's not perfect. It's a learning process.
Yeah, that's I think it's great that, I guess we're becoming a lot more digital and there's such opportunities to be able to integrate that over a traditional systems job. So that's really cool. And there's a lot of sites, I'm sure you've seen that on LinkedIn as well, like Automate America's trying to make it more not necessarily remote, but you can find your own contracts. So I'm really curious how that one's going to play out because I guess I haven't had that much experience with contracting, but
Yeah.
I think
What
it's
talk about that for a second, because Automate America, I just connected with someone on LinkedIn, and I saw that that's what they did, and it's a very similar concept but focused on industrial automation. So what do you know about Automate America?
Well, I guess I was also approached by one of their, I think like representatives, and they kind of got me to make a profile and set up, a page with everything. And to be quite honest with you, I haven't really gotten anything with them yet because I am quite tied up with this one customer for which, I do 60 plus hours of work a week. So it's really difficult for me to squeeze anything else in. But I really see an opportunity, as they kind of mature that as they bring, of course, more jobs on board, then of course more engineers will be on the platform as well. So I think it's going to be a really good link between automation engineers and just the industry. And I think I mean, for sure they're going to face problems that you'd have in any two-sided marketplace, right? Because you need enough engineers for the companies to be interested versus if there's not enough companies, people are not interested. So I think it will take them a little bit of time, but hopefully that is going to pick up. And I think, of course, there's other challenges. The automation industry and just manufacturing in general lags quite a bit, I feel, behind some of the other,
Always,
software
man.
development.
It
I mean,
does.
I know people who work, from Europe for US-based companies out of San Francisco, and it's not a problem at all. Versus automation, I guess people are just much slower in that aspect. So,
Yeah.
also,
I will say though that doing that one project where I was on, like, not, within 10 minutes I'm online with a live PLC controlling a process. I'm like, and that was right around December of like 2018. So I'm like, man, this is different. This is a different world than I grew up in. Like, this would not have even been possible, or if it was, there was no way it was going to actually happen. But it's happening, and that's why I'm really glad that Automate America is doing what they're doing, because,
yep,
and this is not like a sponsored plug or anything.
right,
I'm excited that they're actually developing that platform, because I'm sure probably, like, I wouldn't have been the first, obviously not, but to have that idea, like I had that concept, like, why isn't there a Yelp for system integrators? Why isn't there a Airbnb for system integrators? Like, I was like, I wanted to kind of develop the platform myself, but obviously never executed on that. But that's why I'm trying to take part in it, from like getting momentum behind that from the
yeah,
marketing perspective. I feel like that's where I can serve the industry and help platforms like Upwork, like Automate America, and like the end users who are actually looking to fill these positions and do these projects on those
yeah,
platforms, and just considering it, right? Just try it, you know?
yeah. I agree. I think it's going to be a steep hill for the whole kind of that industry to climb. But I think once we get past the old school notions of always have to be there, which I don't think you certainly should be, then I think it will definitely pick up. But speaking of that, I guess going online with a live PLC from a remote location, that brings me to another question that I just thought about: is what would be your biggest how to say it, like, I guess, mistake or blunder that you ever committed as an automation engineer? I think that's always
Mm,
really interesting.
yeah. If I if I faulted the PLC, that would have been a big blunder, right? So I was
Right, right.
very
Yep.
meticulous and careful. But that's why they hire an expert, right? I've
Hmm.
been doing this for long enough where I was able to get the job done. In my and we all still make mistakes, but that's why you just
Right.
got to be careful. I'm sure if it was super super critical, they would have not had that going remote, or at least had someone like spotting me. Like, all
Hmm.
right, it's safe to. It was just like a chiller, I think. So, maybe they would have lost some product if I did fault it. And but anyways, yeah, biggest blunder. It's definitely got to be like downloading a PLC program to like a well pump application PLC, and like having the values having been saved when it was on and running, and then when you hit run after you download, or after you upload to the PLC, then it starts the well, and it's like boom. And, some of those are like 200-300 horsepower. Those things will like make you jump. And
Yeah.
yeah, and in the water industry, stuff like that is really not that big of a deal. But like, what if that was something different, right? So you learn those mistakes on stuff that hopefully is non-critical.
Right. That doesn't necessarily break, but no, that's it's just always an interesting perspective of what people. But I mean, it's pretty
But
common.
that's, now that I'm thinking about it, that's why in it was a Micrologix PLC. But like, if you had a Compact Logix, you could do like the first scan code, reset everything, all of your objects to like a default state,
Right.
non-running, like put it to HOA off, etc. Those are the things that you learn, hopefully,
Yeah.
when it doesn't hurt someone, right?
Yeah. I think some sites are better than others, and
What
just
what
like
about what about you, man?
I think like programming wise, it's probably like, I guess, similar to you. I had downloaded like a conveying system PLC code to a different PLC, which was a case packer. And I guess the reason why it was bad is because I was even told, like, be careful with the way the links were set up, and the way the addressing was through DH plus, data highway plus, instead of Ethernet. And I guess I was not super familiar at the time with DH plus, and just like any other young engineer, I was like, yeah, I got this, no problem, guys. Like it's everything's gonna be fine. And then my boss ends up leaving the plant, who knew like all the electrical systems, and I for sure like I go online, it gives me the error saying like, oh, the programs don't match, it's not gonna work. Are you sure you want to like download? Like, yeah, okay, like no problem. And so the case packer ends up being I guess a non-usable PLC. And then I got into more trouble because in data highway, when you reassign the address, then if there's a conflicting node, because of course the conveying system had the same, now there's two conveying systems essentially, and it gives you a lot of problems with downloading. So I had to go onto the floor and, like essentially remove that card, connect with the USB. And I think like 3 hours of downtime later, there's a case packer that's running again. And luckily they had some backups. So it wasn't too difficult to restore, but I had to call my boss because, again, I just didn't know Data Highway Plus that well at that time. So, yeah, but
That's a very interesting story, man. Do you have any experience with like high speed process manufacturing?
Well, I guess the P&G plant I was at was running at over 700 products a minute. So I think that's considered high speed. We had high speed vision systems, and we had some of the processes that were, I guess, proprietary to P&G, but were some of the fastest in the world, and you couldn't get any faster. So yeah, what about you?
A little bit, yeah. I worked on a couple of like carbon fiber wrapping machines that
Yep.
and I probably wouldn't consider that high speed. I would just consider that like faster than water, wastewater, which was what I was used to, right? Like where everything's kind of like in a discrete state, as opposed to like having a cyclical process where, like a lot more timing and things like that involved. How would you, if you were tackling a project like that, how would you think about approaching it?
Well, I guess that's an interesting question. I think it's always important to, I guess, first of all, writing down all the requirements of your project. So I guess if you're talking about a machine from scratch, or you're talking about a small integration into existing pieces of equipment, what would you, or both, maybe both?
Yeah, like something that has a lot of steps. So like the particular example I'm thinking of was like this machine that would basically make a carbon fiber bat. It would wrap it around like a drum, and it would make a baseball bat out of carbon fiber. And it was like several different processes and recipes that you'd have to load. So it would go like 27 times back and forth, and then it
Hmm.
would stop, and then you could set whether it wanted to like counterclockwise or clockwise and different things like that. And then it would just kind of go through a series of processes to make the product for you, like kind
Yeah,
of a
so
cyclical, continuous type of program.
yeah, I guess so. The important aspects for me is always to break down the problem into like smaller steps. And like you said, there's multiple processes to that sequential, I guess, assembly. So of course, it's going to be defining like what is your first area, second area, third area. And what I typically do is like I'd call those subsystems, but then I could still break those down even further. And a lot of times, depending on, if you have a sequential process, then you, of course, can start using a sequencer within your small subsystem. Then there's a confirmation or a link to the next one that gets passed down. But it's important to delineate, I want to say from a high level perspective, those little systems in order to be able to accomplish something like that. And I think that's usually the key that's been working for me, is just being able to break down a larger problem into small ones and kind of address, like, here I am in this like little bubble, what needs to happen within that little container, if that makes sense. And then only when that container confirms, yes, like this has been done, move on to the next little container. So that's kind of from a high level perspective, that's what I would do.
That's a great visualization. Yeah, because for me, I found it a little bit difficult to go to that type of programming and process from like water treatment. Everything was just kind of on in its state. Like there was no necessarily, like for example, a well. it might come on during certain times of the day, right? Or it might just come on when the reservoir gets low. So,
Mm.
you just kind of have that logic always running, and then it just does what it's supposed to do. And then,
Okay.
maybe these other booster pumps do another thing, but they're all just kind of on and continuously running and evaluating. And there's not necessarily a cycle. Yeah. So but I think you hit the nail on the head with like breaking it down into subgroups and,
Yeah.
having some sort of integer tracking like the state of it or something.
I guess I think I went the other way. So for me, like my first job was more of a mechanical process that was, very like assembly like, and like I worked on wrappers as well, where you had a piece of product that would come in, then you would have to, obviously index it over through motion commands. But yeah, that was more sequential. And nowadays I'm more in the food industry, so it is more like you describe in your water system where things are running. So I mean, I think the breaking down approach still works. It's just you have to have a slightly different mindset, I guess. But I think it's just like because I get overwhelmed whenever I think of very large systems, and I think that there's hundreds of motors, hundreds of sensors, maybe like 20 conveyors, and then you need to program all of that in one shot, and you got to break it down, because it's just way too easy to start thinking of like, what if the operator does this? What if this guy does that? What if like, this valve opens, but then there's no confirmation switch, and you start like just creating all these kind of cyclical thoughts in your head. And yeah, I mean, I think,
Oh
so,
man, I'm busting up laughing right now. That's engineering hell right there.
yeah. And I think that's important. That's advice from my current, I guess, mentor is like, don't overthink things. Get a kind of a first version out. And I'm sure you know all this, but like get a first version out and then start troubleshooting based on that, because the operator pressing like three buttons in a weird sequence and like the valve is open is a very kind of niche case which may not happen in the real world. So you don't need to protect against those scenarios. But as an engineer, you keep thinking like, oh, what if like this happens, and you just go down that path.
So that's a great answer. So what are some like tools that you use to like help you with your programming, like whether it's a calendar or like some sort of notes app? Like how do you keep yourself productive when you're working on a project?
Um, I wish I could tell you it was something more digital, but I think what works for me is still writing things down. And I guess maybe it's because I still did my schooling mostly on paper. So I still write a lot of notes. I talk about the system with, of course, talking with like the engineering managers that have some kind of a vision, and asking them questions about the system, and just writing it down and talking to operators how they would see that system in a fully functional state. And again, like once you write down some of those thoughts, you can just go through them. And usually I do that quite a bit on flights. So since I fly to the sites very frequently on flights, I review like what kind of information I got, and I start thinking like how I want to break this thing down, and just kind of go from there. And I guess once I have something in programming, then I can break it down further. So to give you an example, I worked on this plant expansion project where once again we had this discharge with multiple conveyors, multiple tanks, and I was like, yeah, that's going to be one system. It's going to be fine. But then as I thought about it more and more, it became kind of, again, that thought process of it being complex kind of stalled me a little bit, you know what I mean, on the programming side. So I had to just sit down and break it down. Oh, like let's do those as subsystems. Let's treat, one tank as like, here's a tank. It's going to have its own UDT, its own AOI instruction, and then essentially that's going to be a contained kind of a subsystem, if you want to call it that. So I'd say pen and paper have been a really good tool, and of course I use a lot of Excel spreadsheets to kind of not only see my own information but relay it to some of the other guys that are going to interface the system down the road.
Do you have any like generic properties that you would associate with each subsystem or each AOI, like a label or state? Like what are those in?
That's a good question. It's I guess I'm very surprised that you'd ask something like that. But yeah, so a subsystem for me, I guess would have the generic things like a start, a stop. It would have a status. it would have its own faults. So again, for example, to come back to the tank system, a tank would be a subsystem, but it could be running, it could be stopped, it could be faulted, it could be for example, in an idle state. So you'd have an integer that represents, I guess, the state. And then it would also have its own alarms. So for example, let me, I guess, draw a bigger picture by saying, like, let's say the tank can fault out, but some of the other tanks may still be working, you know what I mean? So even though you faulted out on the valves on that specific tank or on the levels, you can still run the system independently of that subsystem, if that makes sense. So it would have kind of the basic structure as I
How
described.
would you delineate? How did you say you delineated between just like a fault that would stop just the subsystem, or it would stop the entire system? Like, how would you delineate those? Just by name, or?
Well, so I guess the way I would define that, and again, I use a Excel spreadsheet to do that, but essentially I'd have different classes of faults, and there would also be like warnings. So for example, like I told you, a valve on a certain tank would only be dedicated to that subsystem, right? So imagine the encapsulation of that tank is that subsystem. So you'd have multiple tanks, and I guess this particular customer wanted in the future to add other ones, so you could really easily reapply the same structure. But then the entire system is going to be like, let's say, the discharge system to the tanks. And so this discharge system has its own set of faults. But so if the discharge system faults, well, technically you can't fill the tanks. You know what I mean? So those are global faults versus the tank fault would be like a local fault. So
Okay.
the overall system would encapsulate the subsystems, if that makes sense, but not the other way around. So the faults defined for the tank would only fault out the tank, and the faults defined for the larger system would fault out like the entire system.
Okay. So it'd propagate down, and but not necessarily up.
Correct, correct. But of course, I guess the upper system would still check like what is the status of the tank to allow it to
Right.
go
So
into.
only on one alarms that you've kind of defined that would would be required for the whole system to run would
Hmm.
selectively go up.
Yeah,
I don't know. I just want to get like super technical because I think that's kind of where our interest is kind of,
yeah.
there's like a wide range of guests. So like some people we're going to be talking more about one thing, some people will be talking about another. I've got like people that work at Rockwell. Um,
Mhm.
I don't know if I have anyone from Aviva, but at least not yet. Like when this airs, like it'll be in the future. It's going to air in May. So
Yeah.
I'm still getting some more guests, but case in point, we're both programmers, so might as well talk about this. And then whoever is really interested in talking about the details of PLC programming, and because that's one thing that I'm fascinated with is like every programmer will give you a different answer.
Hmm. And I think that's an important point because I guess I would like to see a lot more standards around PLC programming. Of course, there's, as you're probably familiar, like PAC-ML codes and kind of how that's utilized in automation. But I think that there's room for somebody to, I want to say, like write those down, and that's been kind of a project of mine that I've had in the back of my head, but never actually executed on. But essentially, have some kind of a guide, and maybe not only for the existing systems, but even for like new programmers that come into the field, but say like, hey, you should be doing this like in a certain manner, and you know how you have, well, I mean, for web and kind of programming languages that have been there for a longer period of time or just have a bigger user base, you already have such kind of guides. And they don't need to be like very strict, like, hey, you have to do this, this, and this. But it's weird to go into like a certain plant and see, I've seen things where everything was an AOI. Like I've seen a machine that, like a motor is an AOI, but then like the system that encapsulates the motor is an AOI, then like the entire system's an AOI, and like everything's an AOI. And it becomes like super strange because you're like, boy, like there's these nested AOIs. Like, how does this even like work, and how can you
You
troubleshoot
you can
this?
nest you can nest AOIs in Allen
Yeah,
Bradley.
yeah. You can call
Okay.
an AOI, and that's something that I learned, I guess, this summer when that specific machine was brought in. But
Okay.
it's not a recommended practice by like any means. There's an appropriate way of using those AOIs, and then there's a kind of possible but not recommended way, and that's why I think it's so important to have maybe some kind of a guide. But I don't think there's anything like that
Right.
out there
Because
yet.
that's another point that I'm always kind of going back and forth on is like, at what level do you draw that line of keeping things more like modular at a lower level, or
Mhm.
trying to encapsulate certain systems and subsystems? Like, if you're gonna have two of like this giant chiller, but on the chiller there's like, all these motors, and like, do you keep all those as sub AOIs, or do you make those sub AOIs and then a chiller AOI, but you only have two of them? Like, at what point do you?
I think it's a dangerous kind of line, you know what I mean? Because there is no solid line which will tell you at this point, you know, you can make anything into an AOI, essentially. But should you is the other question that you should ask yourself, I think.
Yeah,
And
there's got to be some reward or payoff, like it'll save you time, or
you know,
like it'll be less air prone. Like, if you want to make sure that both those chillers run exactly the same and there's no mistakes, then of course if you encapsulate that logic into one single source code and then just call it
right.
twice, then that's what you would get.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But I think you always need to think of like the end user as well, you know, because at the end of the day, it's not going to be you most of the time who goes to troubleshoot that system. So you want to make sure that, you know, the techs on the floor, like whoever is going to commission that, is going to understand your code. And like that's the other, I guess, fine line is like how many AOIs do you integrate before, you know, you say like, hey, this is going to be way too difficult to like narrow down what's going on. And you know, to come back to an example, I remember when Derek from LinkedIn had posted about structured text, and I just got like, I guess like I implemented it on my own PLC, and I saw how great it was and how easier it was to create like for loops, for example, in structured text, and then I went on to like making everything a for loop within one of my programs, and I got a lot of pushback from like,
Everything a for loop?
well, not, I guess, things that could be a for loop. I made the for loops in structured text, but
Mm.
I was
Right. Okay.
explaining that I was explaining that concept to the tech on site, and he got really worried about that kind of a design. And essentially, what happened was I got some pushback from the engineering manager, like, "Hey, like, why are we using structured text? Even though it might be easier, it's more difficult to see what's going on from like a technician standpoint." So I think there's a lot of fine lines, but I think it would be good to get some kind of a document together, maybe to
Yeah,
delineate
definitely.
standards.
The CSIA, they do kind of standardization for system integrators, but it's mostly from the business structure perspective, like how to run a systems integrator, but not necessarily anything to do with the execution of those systems.
Hmm.
Um, or there is like the ISA, like ISA 95, but yeah. There's also like the high performance guideline and then ISA 101. Those are good, but I've never really seen those, at least in the industries and projects that I've worked on. Like, I've never seen them executed perfectly to the spec. Like, I think
Yeah.
maybe that's more common in like refineries or the systems that I've never seen, where it's like, fully, like, even down, not just with the like high performance colors, but also like the layer one, layer two, layer three, layer four system screen layout, like
Yeah.
where there's a consistent place where the faceplate of a pump pops up, and like, you kind of have a consistent layer. Like, I haven't seen those systems developed, but yeah, something like that would help us out in developing code that is more standardized and more easy to support and better.
Yeah. No, 100% agree. I think, you know, even some of the smaller things really need standardization because there's just thousand ways to do the same thing. But at the end of the day, it still matters, you know, how you name your tags. For what reason do you make them controller scope, program scope? You know, there's some thought process involved even in those little decisions, but they do impact the way the next person looks at your code and kind of is able to navigate or gets completely lost. So I think it's important.
So, what is your preferred PLC programming platform of choice?
Well, I've got a certain bias towards AB, Alan Bradley. So, you know, it's kind of what I got brought up on. And like I told you before, I got sent to training very early on. And pretty much every single company that I've worked with had Alan Bradley as their primary platform of choice, and I never had the opportunity to even switch to something else, or even, I guess, work with something else outside of the jobs that I did. So at this point, I think it's Allen Bradley when it comes to larger systems, but I do like to read about, some of the other competitors. And I think Siemens does have some really interesting stuff. And I guess on the lower kind of cost side, I'm looking into Automation Direct quite a bit. I have some of their PLCs too. And I really like just being able to, for smaller systems or just smaller projects, to be able to quickly integrate something like that. What about you?
Yeah.
What's
And I'm glad you asked. So
Yeah.
we do got to wrap up in about 5 minutes because I
Yep.
have Lori Kusmal coming on next. She's from Black and Veatch. So yeah, like I said, I have 4 podcasts back to back to back. So that'll
Yep.
give me a little bit of buffer so she doesn't just jump
Hmm.
right, join
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
But so I like Alan Bradley. I mean, I think you said it perfectly. When you kind of learn in a platform, you tend to not want to change that platform. Like I
Hmm.
went to Siemens TIA portal training, and I did become Siemens, certified developer for Somatic HMI and S7 TIA portal.
Yep.
So I did, and I can make a project work, but I definitely prefer Alan Bradley. I don't know why. I think I think if you learned in Codesys, you'd be more easy to kind of go to either TIA or Alan Bradley, because I think if you learn with kind of like it's almost like learning C programming before Python. It'd be easier to
Hmm.
go up, make things easier than to like have that taken away from you. Because like I had
Right.
a hard time going over to Codesys. I mean, again, I could still make a project work, but it was just really like not comfortable like to environment for me to work in. And I'm sure it's better now with like certain like environments like Wagos. They have like this whole IDE now, and like for Codesys 3, I think. But anyways, yeah, Alan Bradley.
It's I guess really quickly, I think it's an important point. I think like if these companies start to bring PLCs at a lower price point, and maybe even the software becoming more available for students or people looking to get into automation, I think that would change the playing field quite a bit. I guess I want to hear your perspective really quick on that, because I think engineers are shying away from learning these platforms because of the expenses and just how difficult it is to kind of get your hands on some of this software and hardware.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that all the software should be free to download and try,
Hmm.
and they can charge for it, at that point. But it should be able to be downloaded and at least played around with. Like, I mean, that's what was so popular about Ignition. You could download it and run it for 2 hours at a time. I mean, you could develop a full project and then
Hmm.
sell it to your customer. But
Yep.
anyways, I think that that model will win in the long run. Um, but
Yeah.
I would take a look at Easy Automation. They have a really cool Easy Rack PLC, and it Easy Automation, and they also speak MQTT Sparkplug B natively,
Oh,
so the
that's
PLC can.
EZ Automation, right? Like with the capital EZ. Okay, I
Yep.
think I've seen some of their ads on Facebook, but I never pulled the trigger on getting some of their stuff. But yeah, I'll definitely look into it.
So yeah, man, Vlad, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Do you have any where people can reach you?
I'd say LinkedIn would be the best place. I'm trying to build kind of a better social media presence on LinkedIn. Just as you know, I think it's a very great platform. And
And what's
I
your
forgot to.
YouTube channel?
Um, I guess my current PLC one is going to be Solus PLC, but you can find it more on the website because I'm still not at 1,000 subscribers, so you can't really search that. But it's
Okay.
solusplc.com. And but yeah, I think reaching me on LinkedIn is definitely possible, and I'm sure you'll leave some notes in the comment section. So if people do want to reach
Definitely.
out, yeah, I
Do you have
appreciate
a
everything.
closing
Uh,
statement, or question for the audience?
That is, I forgot which podcast you took that from, but it's a very, very good way to end. Question. I think it's more of an incentive. I'd really like, if you're listening from a non-automation field, I'd really like for you to kind of give this a try and see if that's your thing. I think there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of growth possibilities, and I think automation's only gonna take over the current industries more and more. So that's kind of an ask more than a question, but I think automation is great. And yeah.
Thank you, Vlad.
Absolutely. Thank you, Zach. Appreciate it.
Talk to you later,
Take
man.
care.
Bye.
Bye.